to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. As usual, I'm your host, Sam Mickey, and this week I am very happy to welcome onto the show Paul Waldau. Paul, thank you so much for making time for us.
Privileged to be here. We've had conversations before, but I can't say I've anticipated any with more pleasure than this one.
Oh, geez. Thank you so much. And for folks who don't know you, you're an educator, an activist, a scholar. You work at the intersection of animal studies, law, ethics, religion, cultural studies. The interdisciplinary scope of your work is one of the things that's so inspiring to me. And you've been a professor at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, where you were senior faculty for the Master of Science program in anthrozoology. You're an author and editor of numerous books, not to mention articles and book chapters. I have a couple for people who are watching this right by my shoulder here. Your edited a book with Kimberly Patton, A Communion of Subjects, Animals in Religion, Science, and Ethics, and then Animal Studies, An Introduction. Both amazing books, can't recommend highly enough. So really excited to talk to you about your work, your perspective at the intersection of religion and ecology, religion and animals. And I think first and foremost, what I always like to hear from people is just about you as a person. Who is the person who got interested in the intersection of religion, ecology, religion, and animals? Because of course, normally when people think, if you want to understand animals, you're going to think about science. And if you want to talk about religion, you're talking about otherworldly things. And it's kind of rare for people to find these things compatible and to engage with that intersection. So what was your path into this kind of work?
Born in Southern California, mom was born there and has indigenous ancestors in California, but father was from New Jersey. They met in the Pentagon during World War II. I'm born in 1950, 8 children, really lovely, wonderful combination of love and poverty. We had Southern California was wide open, and all of us turned out to be quite distinctive individuals. I got to go to college and I was a religious studies major after going entirely through Catholic school, very quality high school experience particularly. And there I became a religious studies major with a wonderful philosopher of religion, Walter Capps. I then went on to study at the University of Chicago just briefly, then at Stanford, got a master's degree. But then I thought, I got to get into the real world here. It was a time where males weren't getting hired in the academic world, particularly because we had such an imbalance of males. So I went to law school. I had a wonderful run in law school. I got a job with a wonderful law firm, became partner, the administrative partner, and the recruiter. But after 15 years left, and thought, I'm going back to do what I most want to do, and that is to return to the intersection of values, religion, living beings, both human and non-human. That was just a part of the world I grew up in, and I had wonderful experiences with my family and the local wildlife, and I wanted to explore that. So I went to Oxford, got a PhD, got a fellowship at Harvard, got a job at Tufts Vet School, became the director of the Center for Animals and Public Policy there. A dean came by after about 10 years and said, I don't like these liberal thinkers. And I was the 16th faculty member let go. There was no tenure.
Wow.
I then got the job at Canisius and was able to run a graduate program there. Those were seminal experiences for me, Sam, to be able to shape a curriculum. And my particular interest is to take a look at the way disciplines could interact, but often don't, because as one person said once, disciplines are infrastructure in search of self-perpetuation, trying to get more money for their program, and meanwhile not necessarily cooperating. And whose vocabulary can be used, because there's so many different vocabularies. So I wanted to work across disciplines, and I got a chance to teach religion in animals, law in animals, ethics in animals, and science in animals. I designed those 4 classes at the Canisius program because I got to teach those to these fabulous graduate students coming there. We had about 15 every year. They ranged from 25 to 65.
Hmm.
They were serious about pursuing this, and they were my instructors. And I got to walk with them and do really special projects with them. And I grew from the books I did. The latest book has a subtitle that'll kind of summarize what I do. The book is called The Animal Invitation. It'll be published in 2025, but its subtitle tells you what it's about: science, ethics, religion, and law in a more than human world. How do we pursue those elegant tasks, talking about spiritual issues and the great heritage we have from our past, our forebears on religious awareness? What do we do with our ethical abilities? What do we do with science? It's so powerful and amazing. And law is a very powerful institution in modern societies. How do we turn that to our generosity, or how can we make that more generous? All those issues are not well dealt with
Right.
in the academic world because it's so balkanized into disciplines.
Yeah.
So for me, crossing boundaries is your work in integral ecology is the same sort of thing. It's how do we get these wonderful conversations in more in sync and to talk to each other. And that's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to today is I recognize in your work and in my work this desire. Both of our mentors, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, do the same thing. They get people from disparate disciplines, segments of life to talk to each other, and everybody's enriched. That process for me, Sam, is important in going forward in education, particularly. I don't know how to do that other than with my full self and to walk with spirits like you and Mary Evelyn and John. But I know there's something so gratifying, so self-actualizing in that, that makes me able, by transcending my own personal issues and listening to others, I find I actually become much more. And that is a stunning development that you will also see inside of, I think, the best meditation traditions and religious traditions, letting people self-transcend and thereby more fully self-actualize.
Beautifully said. And I have so many things that I want to talk about. And one of them is this idea of self actualization. Because, of course, part of it is that we're trying to help one another self actualize. And then how does that work across species boundaries? It's one thing for even just you and I, as just two humans, to support each other as we're on our own journey in self actualization. But a big part of your work has been this kind of critique of speciesism or human exceptionalism, anthropocentrism, human chauvinism. I mean, so many terms for this problem that's been so insidious and persistent in recent centuries and millennia, uh, working across species boundaries and helping non-human animals. And of course, we're animals too, so it's, human animals and non-human animals. What does that mean to you? What does it feel like? How do you engage that, stepping across that species line?
First of all, it's difficult. It's not the standard way of approaching things. When you think of how economics is taught, it's taught from a radically human-centered perspective, and it is a segment of the humanity only. But if someone listening to this podcast and they're looking at the screen, they're going to see two primates, two mammals. Those are animal categories. You and I are as animal as a wolf is, or an elephant, or an amoeba. I think there's good news available in that within us are fundamental animal abilities that in some ways overlap with some other animals, and in some ways we're quite distinctive. Sperm whales have the largest brains on Earth. They're quite distinctive too. They might say, well, we're the epitome of what an animal should be, the
Right.
biggest possible brain. Um, I do think there are plenty of internal resources for us biologically to help us with this. I think the other thing, Sam, that's so important is that in our history, although our education is not pitched to this, in our history as heirs to all the different human cultures, with this information explosion, we have access to a lot of that in our pocket through the phone. Um, there are such good stories of so many different cultures that recognize humans need to be responsible citizens in a more than human world. We're in a more than human world. Ask the local lions or the local elephants. Um, and we have that capability deep within our brains, but also in our cultures. I don't think we've done a good job of retrieving it, not because these people have disappeared. They haven't. They're there. Um, but we often ignore what we call indigenous peoples as somehow lesser than civilized people. Honestly, they set standards of civilization to which we can aspire by being good citizens in our local world. So there's really good news. You have to find it in your local place, you have to find it with other people. And this isn't something that's going to change overnight, but it is changing. And you and I get the chance to talk to each other, and we have many, many colleagues who do this as well. So for me, there's a joy in it. Also, I'm almost 75. I realize I only have a decade or two more, but I realize it's not about me getting to do it. It's about me helping all of us, and thereby me and others, do this as well as we can. Will we do it perfectly? No. Can we do it better? Oh my, yes. And we will be able, it'd be like being listening to the best music you've ever heard, and you get to dance to it with the people you most love. For me, I think, okay, I'm willing to work towards that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I appreciate you also just mentioning the fact that, somebody watching this podcast would see a couple primates. I always feel like that when I'm playing with my cat. Nothing makes me feel more like a primate than interacting with a mammal who's not a primate. And I'm like, yeah, I think when my cat is feeling me, she's like, who is this ape? This ape is just with my arms, and it's just like that's yeah, I feel so much like a primate. Um and the point about also that it's not about us. It's the collective, it's future generations. Um, Now, another question I have, excuse me. One of the complicated things in our society, I'm thinking of just modern Western societies, is that articulating these values is generally want in law, in ethics, in science. People are kind of allergic to religion, and and that might be changing gradually over time, but you've navigated this boundary in, I think, a very nimble way. And so I'm curious, how do you translate maybe between the kind of religious and the secular, because that's such a fraught area. I think even I teach at a Jesuit university, the University of San Francisco, and even there, a lot of students are kind of hesitant to talk about religion. And I'm like, you're at a Jesuit university. How are you? But even then, if people are just, I'm just skeptical about it, they're a little hesitant. But so much of your work has been very effectively, in my opinion, navigating that boundary. So how do you deal with that boundary? Religion and science, religion and ethics, religion and law.
By listening careful to others who are navigating it and seeing what are my options. Let me go back to family briefly. That I was raised Catholic, as I mentioned. Uh, that was a worldview, very powerful. It was the most populous religion that still is on earth today. Uh, I'm not a practicing Catholic any longer. I stopped when I was 18 years old. I was in college. It was my first year, but I had always assiduously followed all the rules. I was careful and I cared to try to do that. I worked really hard at it. Um, but I decided I want to choose. I don't want to just take the chance that I was born into the right faith. I'm going to go choose and sort out. So I become a religion major, and that was a wonderful experience. I just had great people teaching, and it was, gosh, they were wonderful. And later in life, I stumbled on this was the time of transcendental meditation in the um, late 60s, and I learned transcendental meditation. But I've
Hmm.
probably studied about six other meditation traditions since. I still meditate every day. It's very important to me, and I recognize all right, so there are deep skills that are available in humankind. They weren't presented to me so much necessarily in the Catholicism that I was immersed in, but I resonated with that. So there's a part of me that I'll tell you two brief stories on this. There's a part of me that is deeply religious, even though I don't actually espouse a particular religion over all other religions. One of those stories is I'm at Oxford and I'm doing my dissertation as the specter of speciesism and looking at Christian views of animals and Buddhist views and doing a comparison. It was a wonderful exercise. There wasn't a lot of material on it, so I could speak freely. I'm at the table in my apartment on the Thames, right by Christ Church College, and it was a gathering place for people. And there were people around the table, and uh, people invariably, when they came, Sam, asked, why are you studying religion and animals? Are you really religious?"
Hmm.
And I said, "No, I'm not particularly religious." Now, a good Australian friend of mine who is quite religious was there. He's a wonderful constitutional law scholar today. Goes, "No, but you're very spiritual, Paul." And I thought, "Oh, okay, I'll own that. That's a perfectly wonderful term." But I recognized from that religiousness isn't affiliation with a particular group. It is a general orientation in life. And a relevant story to that, I had a twin brother till I was 54, and he died from cancer, from cigarette smoking, sad, but a great guy, and still the major figure in my life. Great experience to have been twinned up with Chuck. Chuck, at one point, I'm the intellectual one and he's the playboy. So, I'm thinking I know what I'm doing. And um, at one point, I said something, and my twin brother said to me, he had a deep wisdom, as you'll see from this comment. Um, he said, "Paul, you're really a Buddhist. You're just afraid to admit it." I thought, I'm not afraid to admit anything. But when he said that, I realized in my lifestyle, I had adopted meditation traditions, particularly Thich Nhat Hanh's work
Hmm.
was influential for me. Um, and I realized that in my daily life, I am very comfortable with Buddhism. I've been in a lot of Buddhist centers. I've traveled to a lot of religious centers and different traditions, but I'm surely comfortable in Buddhist centers and had spent literally thousands of hours meditating in the Buddhist style. I thought, I'll take that. That's humbling to have someone tell you you're not you can't even admit what you most basically are. But I find that the Buddhist tradition, the Jain tradition, does this as well, but so does the Jesuit tradition. One, my closest friend outside my family right now is a Jesuit.
Hmm.
Um, and I I realize there are wonderful spiritual traditions available. You don't need to have all of them. Find one, follow it, recognize how much that allows you to do so much more than you would do if you weren't following it, and then appreciate it. Don't absolutize it and say everybody else is supposed to follow you. That was the difficulty I had with the Catholicism I was raised in. It was extra ecclesiam, outside the church, nulla salus, no salvation. I thought, I don't think that's right. Um, so one last brief story, because I really feel strongly about certain positive things about the Catholic Church. Um, when Pope John the 23rd died,
Hmm.
1965, I think it is. When he died, someone said, "It will be a long time before we again have a Protestant Pope." And I thought, well, that's a really interesting comment.
Right.
Not when I was at Canisius, I happened to be seated at a table next to the local bishop, and we were talking. And back, he was an animal person, and he loved animals, and he was introduced to me. We were just going at it like you and I are doing right now. And we're having a conversation, and I then told him the story of that person saying, "It will be a long time before we again have a Protestant Pope." And I said, "Actually, that guy was wrong. We've got Francis right now." And Francis is an ecumenical sort of Protestant Pope as well. And I thought religion is constantly evolving and coming back to some of these most important existential anchors. And in Catholicism, you can find that. I happen to attend an Episcopal church right now with my wife, who's very deeply Christian, and it is as beautiful an exemplification of spirituality as I have ever been amidst in my life. And I'm completely content, even though I don't share the theology, but what I do share, Sam, and I know you share this as well as Mary Evelyn and John, our good friends. I share the spirit of what they're doing, and I want to do everything I can to help them do more of what they're already doing.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way to put it. Whatever people are doing on their spiritual path, I want to help them do more of that and further that in whatever way we can. And
Yeah.
yeah, Francis is such a good example. Pope Francis, even recently, I forget exactly where he was, but I know he was speaking somewhere. He was kind of on a world tour recently, and he mentioned like all religions are paths to God. They
It's
all
true.
get there.
Yeah.
And of course, you kind of, there's the old metaphor that there's different paths up the mountain, but it's the same summit for all of
Yes,
them.
yes,
And
yes.
or maybe it's like there's different shores, but it's the same ocean that you're looking at. And yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And it sounds like we have a very similar path in that regard, because I was also raised Catholic, and then kind of stopped practicing, and then fell in love with things like Taoism and Buddhism and other traditions. And so yeah, and really that's really putting the Catholicity in Catholic. It's supposed to be universal, and that would mean that of course we're going to listen to indigenous traditions and Asian spiritualities, and yeah, like all of it is welcome, or things like transcendental meditation. So yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Well, but then here's the thing: how do you talk about that stuff to people who really don't want to hear about it? Because our religious understandings of animals, for instance, how do you translate that into ethics and law when generally I would think our legal system, our ethical systems, they don't want to hear about religion, and if they do, they might want to hear about it in a very narrow sense. But how do you deal with that boundary?
Well, I think I don't know the general answer to that. I know it's always with the person in front of me that I'm going to be dealing with it.
Right.
So hopefully, by listening to her or him as carefully as I can, and being in a conversation mode after a while, walking together,
Mm.
um, you realize that I can say what I really think here. In fact, I should compliment the person by saying what I really think rather than saying what I think they want to hear.
Mm.
Um, and in religion, for me, when you get to somebody who's a deeply spiritual person, they're nimble enough to deal with my shortcomings in communication. Um, they, they figure out, he may be wordy, he may be stumbling at times on ideas, but he's in good faith, and I can sense that in them.
Mm.
I the, Gandhi once said, "The act will speak unerringly." People who
Mm.
are generous to other humans, whether it's just their local impoverished people who need help or working with some other marginalized group for some reason, when I'm in the midst of them, I realize I'm home. I'm
Mm.
with my larger family. And that's really a compliment for me because I have such a visceral love for my own biological family and for my wife. Uh, but I recognize that there are familial connections um, with other people as long as I stay nimble and I stay positive. I also want to take this across the species line in a sense. Sometime I have a book coming out in 2025 called The Animal Invitation, and there is a story told in there of one of the things that happens to me when I walk in the natural world. I try to do that every day. I sometimes come across I often do come across some wildlife. And I can recall once coming across a mink when I lived in Sherburne, Massachusetts. Now, mink are tough. They're in charge. I mean, they're like little tiny wolves. And you don't want to try to mess with them at all. They're quicker, way more aggressive than I could ever be. But I saw one in a tree, and I stood there in awe on the path. And then I realized, no, 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 this is the minx world. Get out of here. Let it have its world. Get out of it.
Mm.
You're a big smelly mammal. Move along. So I did. But every time, Sam, when I walked by that tree again, that place was suffused with meaning for me.
Mm.
That encounter was still there. And the reason I mentioned that story's in the book, but that happens to me when I would walk along a river and come across six turtles on a log, or a little frog hopping across the path. The next time I'd be in that place, it was suffused with meaning. And I thought, it's as if wildlife, other people are doors which, if I let them just open and see into that door, I realized, no, 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 that the spirituality is right here. Stop trying to do metaphysical stuff, transcendence. I mean, that's a good term in so many ways. But for me, it actually is in the present moment that this plays out. So there's a part of me that knows if I let it play out with other people's religion coming to me and me not being judgmental, or if it's some sort of non-human form of life, let them be whatever it is I can discern of them. I realized, okay, the world will teach me. I have a lot of degrees. I don't have as much learning as I'd like. And I realized all those degrees taught me was how to learn. Can I
Mm.
please employ that every moment of my life?
Yeah, and especially, I mean, you have degrees from some pretty prestigious institutions as well, and so that's I think a profound thing to say. It's like, well, they taught me how to learn, but I still have so much to learn. And then even just
Yeah, yeah,
walking along and
yeah.
seeing some turtles on a log or a mink in a tree, you're like, oh, I have so much more to learn. And I especially appreciate that there's something that happens to that space so that after you see the mink in a tree, the tree is now a different tree to you. And you're like, there was this encounter, and forevermore, when I go by here, I'm going to feel that sense of awe or reverence, and kind of get stamped on you.
Can I, your notion, the way you explain integral ecology in your podcast, where you're talking about your views, so well exemplifies what you just said.
Hmm.
There is a way in which the universe is constantly teaching us, and we teaching others, and they teaching us. There is a, if you become insular and egotistical so that only your interests matter, you have so impoverished yourself. And it's that for egotists, they'd say that doesn't make any sense. That's illogical. It's like,
Right.
I'm not trying to make logical sense. I'm trying to make existential sense here. Who are we? We have boundaries, but they're porous. And I'm breathing air. I need the oxygen in the atmosphere that both of us are breathing right now. That oxygen was created by other life forms a long time ago. It's called the Great Oxygenation Event. And I realize my life is dependent on other life. My life is short. I mean, not terribly short I'm going to live my four score probably, but there's a part of me that realizes I'm not in this alone. I'm immersed in the most remarkable world that I could possibly be in. It's the local world that I'm in. And if I will just pay attention, I will find that mink again, or their cousin, or some other creature that will, if I just don't bring my human-centered preconceptions, I will have my shoes blown off. Like, holy smoke, this is a world. Right now in New England, it's just turning fall. I don't know which
Hmm.
season's my favorite here, but it's usually the current one. So, so right now, the fall here is something where you just think the show's beginning and you think, yet again, here we go. So I'm lucky to be in a position of having had good colleagues who taught me to stay open-hearted, open-minded, and that has just made the world unfurl for me every single time I'm walking in it. And it's like, okay, I mean, that must sound naive to someone who has never had that, but it's like, just try it.
Yeah.
Just try it. Oh,
Yeah, right. No, I feel the same way. Yeah, it could easily sound naive to somebody who hasn't tried it. And then once you try it, you're like, oh, okay. And yeah, I feel that so many times where I just like feel my heart open and break at the slightest things. just seeing like a bird fly by or something like that, and you're like, oh, this, and it's just so much. And I think even my younger self, if I could go back and tell me, guess what, you're gonna have your heart break every time you see a bird, and you're like, no
Yeah,
way, what are you talking about? Like
sure.
if there's some transcendent goodness to life, it's so beyond things like our fellow creatures. And then you find like, no, it's exactly there. It's in our fellow creatures. It's in this communion of subjects.
Yes. Here's a point. When I ran the Tufts program, there was a guy from MIT who came and did environmental stuff. A wonderful guy. I'm going to forget his name as I'm telling this story, but I talked to him. He said to me at one point, so he's an MIT tenured professor, and he's coming out and teaching at the Animals and Public Policy program at Tufts Vet School. He said, Paul, I don't know what it is, but your students are so responsive here.
Mm,
And I puzzled over that. Why is that? Why would the students focusing on non-human animals and animal protection be more responsive than the environmental people? The environmental issue is much bigger and more complex. But I think the reason for that, Sam, was something like the following, and I wrote this in one of the books I did um, published. The students who engage another animal are engaging an individual. That's quite an important skill. Individual, next individual, oh, another individual, and you learn to pay attention to the specific individual and their idiosyncrasies, their uniquenesses. So you actually become quite nimble at the fact that there's great diversity out there in individuals, and it makes you
mm,
only more interested in the next individual you're going to meet.
mm,
Whereas the environmental people, now this is a huge issue, and it's important to environmental issues are crucially important. It's the macro issues in some ways, but they're actually built out of micro issues. And if you're attentive to the local mink or to the local cat in a shelter or etc., you will have robust caring muscles in your daily life.
mm,
And that is serviceable to a fuller life. Caring about the macro issues of, oh, ho, eco niche is here with this one, those are important. I care immensely about those. But it's hard to develop your ethical responses in your visceral self on ecosystems. What matters are the little minks and the turtles and the et cetera in them, because those ecosystems are super important, partly because the populations in them are extraordinary and your chances are infinite that you will have your socks blown off. I thought that was the difference for the animal people. Had strong muscles on caring about specific individuals and not strong muscles for caring about macro concepts like eco-niche. I
mm.
think both of those are crucial. I do not think of those as separate topics. I think of them as folded into each other. That's like a card. One side is one side, the other side is the other side, but they're the same card.
Right.
And for me, caring about animals, you cannot care about non-human animals and not care about the environment. And I haven't the slightest idea how to care about the environment without caring about individual living beings. So for me, I was so appreciative to have entered the door where the individual thing was developed heavily, because that helped me see why both of these are crucial to going forward.
That's, yeah, very well said. I like the image of the animal and the ecosystem as one card, and there's two sides, but it is one card. Because of course, for people who are familiar with the last 50 years of environmental ethics, there's been such a tension between the animal people and the ecosystem
Yeah.
people, and they often are completely at odds with one another. But I think that is a really good point. Like in terms of the compassion muscle, the empathy muscle, the sympathy muscle. Like, how do you care if you can't care about individuals? And it's going to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
harder to grow that sense of care. Well, along those lines, here's a question. Um, like, to what extent then do we try to make sure that all animals don't hurt? I'm thinking in particular, Martha Nussbaum had this book come out this past year on justice for animals, and she argues that we should help all animals go vegetarian. and so that lions shouldn't eat gazelles or whatever, and that means we should give them some protein enriched straw that they can eat, and then we'll give well, you say, well, then the gazelles are going to overpopulate. Well, we'll give some kind of birth control to the gazelles, and we'll manage animals in a way where they never hurt, because it seems like she's got that sense of care for animals.
Yeah.
So is it okay that animals eat other animals? I know that's kind of like a rudimentary question, and there's lots of different answers, but I'm curious, as somebody who has so much expertise in this area, where are you at with that?
First of all, I respect her immensely. She's a very formidable thinker, and she's come up with her book, The Frontiers of Justice. One of them is non-human animals, but it's also two human issues that are so central to our failures as a species. Um, I don't think it's right that we manage what other animals eat. We're just one kind of animals. That's gonna involve us in pushing forward our frailties and limited understanding, it
Hmm.
seems to me. I don't think I mean, but first of all, I understand the instinct. Part of me thinks, I'm pretty sure the tigers aren't going to like that. And actually, the premise here is that we're all sort of equals. I still, anybody who can read Martha Nussbaum's work is going to be better off coming through it. She's incredibly sensitive and bright and caring. I don't think there are easy answers
Yeah.
in the world. Um, for me, in a way, it's like, what are the limited things that I can do? I don't mean to evade that question. For me, I just say, I don't think I want to recommend that. It's more business as usual. Humans, probably male humans, telling everybody else how to live. It's like that. We're
Right.
that isn't the design. Who is it? The Buddhist, American Buddhist, I've forgotten his name, but he said at one point, everything's life is something else's death.
Hmm.
Every living being's death is some other living being's life. There is an intertwinedness here. Now, I don't mean that we're supposed to go out and push the predation, but if it's the natural order, it is, and it can be cruel. It certainly can be cruel, although the cruelest animals of all, as far as I can tell, are humans. Unbelievably cruel. And the irony, of course, is that we're super cruel to other humans in a tradition that says all humans matter. It's like, really? A brief story to see how our icons sometimes have done really good things, but some of them are so, if you look at their life closely and sensitively, you'd think, I don't want to hold this person to be an icon. I'm going to take a superstar, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, when he's penning, all men are created equal, has serving him a black male servant, a slave. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're writing a phrase that on its face is so important, and in your actual life, you're contradicting it. Now, that isn't a somebody that I want to go, this is one of my heroes. I like the phrasing. Um, I would rather that it was all humans are created equal because I understand the point of that. But in some sense, I'd like to take it even beyond that. But Thomas Jefferson was an intriguing person, but so full of conflicts. Probably all of us have some of these. But there's a part of me that when I think about trying to manage the natural world, I don't think we're ready for that attempt yet. Um, Maybe if these are animals in our control, we can help with that. Okay. But I'm concerned that our long history of trying to manage the world goes out and us as a starting to do this to wild populations. And I think um, that's really beyond our remit. That we don't really have the skills to do that. And whenever we've tried to manage people, we have ruined them, like the forced conversions of so many indigenous peoples in the Americas
Hmm.
by the Christians coming out of Europe. Forced conversions. It's for their own good. Like it was not
Yeah.
for their own good. It was for your self-affirmation. And it was you wrongly harming people who were your equal in every sense and superior in some senses. And you couldn't even see that. You couldn't see their religions for the spiritual endeavors they were. You couldn't see their legal systems for the far better legal system than you brought out of England and off the continent here, where that legal system has subordinated tons and tons of humans. So in a way, for me, as I go forward, I think, still, there's a point that she's making that is worthwhile. I don't think it's the actual substantive point of giving them stuff, but saying, just think about this. This maybe helps our minds think better if we think this problem out.
That's a great response. Great response to a very complicated problem. And yeah, I 100% agree. It's the management thing. I always think management is, manus. It's our hands, getting our hands on everything. And I don't know if we want our hands on everything. That seems to
Correct.
create more
This
problems.
isn't going to be it's not a pretty world. I mean, what do we have 1,000 species going extinct a day right now? Do you really want us managing it? I think we've shown we're not very good at this. Let's stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it. Let's be more communal somehow, but not in charge.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. More communal, not in charge. And I guess this is the thing is like, how do you live with a non-anthropocentric worldview? It's like, well, we still want to be part of the larger community, but we're not going to be on top of it. We're not going to be the managers. We're not going to be in charge of it, but we're going to care about all of it. And sometimes caring about things means letting them be.
I think too, you and I, as growing up as males in a very male-centric society, I'm not troubled if someone says you don't want to look at that as males typically do. Think, yeah, okay, I can do that. So add in females, and for example, I have many. My wife, my stepdaughter, uh, my sisters, my mother, all had forms of wisdom, which, to the extent I can just take a bit of them, I am so much richer. Fortunately, it was not an overwhelming patriarchal situation that I was raised in. My mother's genius was allowed to be its idiosyncratic self, and my father's as well, and all the children. It was chaos, but it was a kind of it was healthy in that sense. My sense, in some ways, is we're still on a steep learning curve, and Sam, some of the things that is exciting about talking together is um, we both know we can frame things in certain ways, but there's always a humility to framing it from a human vantage point, particularly an American privileged vantage point. It's like, check that with other people in the world first, and then you're going to end up moderating it some ways. And for heaven's sakes, get some of the superstar women in your world in on this, because they're going to soften up each other as well as ourselves. And that's actually just think of how rich we are when that happens. You and I are beneficiaries of Mary Evelyn Tucker.
Mhm.
She, boy, I almost tear up when I say this. She conducts herself in a way that is so fully human and enriching, and so fully animal, and so fully realizes potential that we have, that you can't help but learn and be deeply appreciative of this person. Jane Goodall is like that as well when you're around her.
Mm.
You realize this is what a human can be. And those kinds of things are really good to stay attuned to, because most of us are just fairly individual animals with our limits. Okay, okay, go to school on that, and be communal.
Well, I am curious. You mentioned Jane Goodall. I've not had the pleasure of meeting her. Do you have a Jane Goodall story to share with us? Because of course, we both know Mary Evelyn Tucker, and I 100% agree. She's so inspiring and such a good exemplification of the Confucian virtue of humanness, right? Ren.
Yes.
But mentioning Jane Goodall, who I appreciate her work so much, never got to meet her, but it sounds like you've been in her presence. So I'm curious if you have a little more to say about her.
Here's a story that captures her. Um, that's not the right word.
Right.
Liberates her for people's imagination. I was part of 30 people invited down by the American Zoological Association to a gathering in Florida, and Jane was part of it as well.
Hmm.
Also going as the chairman of the biological anthropology department at Harvard, Richard Wrangham, And I'd worked with both of them a great deal with the Grade 8 project that I ran for a while. And now it comes to question and answer sessions. Okay, so there's 30 of people, everybody's credentialed, shall we say. Baruti Galdikas is in the room, and one of the other great female primatologists. Anyway, but here's what happens. Questions the moderator asks. Hands go up. Jane. Jane asks a question. It's answered and it's interesting. So the next question was somebody else. Then third question, the moderator go, Jane. And then fourth question was somebody else. Fifth question, and everybody, nobody's resenting what's happening here. Fifth question, Jane. Sixth question, somebody else. Seventh question, Jane. And I was watching that thinking, holy smoke, everybody here is completely comfortable because Jane carries herself in a way that she has a moral authority that no one here is resenting that she's getting the same number of questions as everybody else combined. Because Jane had conducted herself over such a long period of time and made such a difference in the world for so many of us in the room, for everybody in that room, and she deserved that. And I think Mary Evelyn Tucker is like that as well. I would think that's pretty wise. Whoever's asking those questions is getting the best out of this group. But that story tells you most of us are individual and might think, no, everybody should have had a turn. And in a way, that's right. But I will bet not one person in that room had a second thought, because that was the dynamic struck me as wise. I look back at that and think that's a strange phenomenon, but I think sometimes we have the visceral ability to sense this is a good way to go, even if it's not perfectly balanced, because some people carry such helpful wisdom for the rest of us.
That's great. That's a great story, and such a important point that balance isn't always the end game, because there's sometimes it's like, well, no, this extremely wise person should hold the floor a little bit more. Like, I have a stupid question I could ask. Like, no, let her speak, please. And so I think that
Yes.
also opens a larger question. We think of it in terms of interspecies dynamics, that it's not necessarily that everybody's on a level playing field here, including predation, right? Some animals are going to eat other animals, and that's okay. That's part of the order of things. And so I wonder if you could, speak to that, not just within the animal world, but also just larger in terms of the whole Earth community and the vast panoply of different life forms. How do we deal with interspecies differences in a way where we honor the unique capabilities of different organisms, while also, I guess, trying to give balance to things? You have this kind of idea of like biocentric egalitarianism. Every organism matters equally. I'm like, yes, but there's also certain hierarchies where some animals are going to eat other animals. Some things get more importance than others, and there are different domains. And it's such a living question for me. Again, just going back to what we were saying earlier about the difference between the animal people and the ecosystem people. The ecosystem people are often thinking, well, let's keep the whole system balanced. The animal people want to make sure every animal is cared for. How are we dealing with these kind of differences?
Well, I think we're on a steep learning curve there. Mark Twain grew up along the Mississippi, and he had such respect for the captains, and eventually he gets on the boat, and he's just a low level person, and but after months and months and months of being on the boat, somebody during the social sessions asked him a question, and he writes, Twain was such a clever person with language. He said, I was gratified to be able to answer promptly, and I did. I said, I didn't know. I think there are some questions that are complicated. Part of me really thinks we have been so ingrown on humans alone, and usually just some segment of the human population alone, that for our ability to answer the broad question that you just posed is truncated. There's some such exciting work on all kinds of. We're in a renaissance of science today that happens every 40 years or so. We're just amazing. What, for example, you and I are land mammals. Well, most living beings aren't on land. Most living beings are in the ocean, partly because the Earth is three-quarters water.
Right.
And there's an enormous number of organisms down below in the ground that's been discovered in the last several decades. The numbers, we don't even know within a factor of the power of 10, the actual number of species that exist. In other words, there could be 10 billion or there could be 100 billion. It's like, well, that's actually a pretty big deficiency. And I think we're in a discovery mode. It was in 1921. Watch thou, this number signals what's happening here. 1921, I think, where Edwin Hubble just figured out, oh, we're not the only galaxy. There's another nearby galaxy because of its redshift. You could just turn. So there's two. Well,
Right.
that's 1920. So 100 years later, we now think there are probably hundreds of trillions of galaxies. We've gone from, in a century, discovering the second to now hundreds of trillions. Do we think we know the number now? It's like, no, no, no. We're on a steep learning curve. My personal sense is that the work on plants is incredibly important, partly because they are the foundation for the animal life in so many ways. And what will we do with that? Is like, I don't know. I grew up in an era where paying attention to non-human animals was considered radical. It wasn't radical in the best sense of the word, going to the root. It was radical in the sense of it's too far out there. It's like,
Right.
no, gosh, it's actually the root of our lives here. Um, so I think in some ways, Sam, some of the things, questions that you and I have the power to ask with these primate brains need to be put over here, saying this kind of interesting, probably not mature enough. It's like being 4 years old and wanting to go to the high school prom. Not yet. Just wait a couple centuries. My sense is that we have had so many here. Think of how you and I study religion. Science, we just talked about, has revolutions. Religion is constantly undergoing change. At the American Academy of Religion, there's a whole section that focuses on new religions. In other words, there's so many new religions coming along all the time. There's more. It's like, and Catholicism today isn't what it was 100 years ago or 400 years ago, and etc. Islam, same. And you realize, well, in 100 years, we will have more accumulated wisdom. People will have been able to see our podcast. So the point is that I think we're building in some ways, and part of me realizes these are absolutely spectacular questions that I can answer promptly and say, I don't know. I don't know.
That's great. Well, you'll never get pushback from me when your answer is based in Mark Twain. That's I think that's always a good approach. I can answer promptly. I do not know. Uh, well, geez, I could probably keep you for another few hours here. But but I want to let you go. But I want one more question, which I know, as you know, I predominantly teach undergraduates, and and of course, you know, I've some friends who have 2-year-old kids, and so the future weighs on me.
Sure.
What do you think are the big, I mean, considering like what you're saying, like 100 years ago, the big debate was, are there two galaxies? And we're like, oh, there's a second galaxy. And then holy moly, what we've realized in the last century. And so what are the challenges in terms of our relationship to non-human animals and our relationship to other humans and our relationship to the larger Earth community, to the cosmos, whatever it is? What do you see are the challenges that we really need to work on? What are the kind of, I don't know, the leverage points? What are the big problems that future generations really need to be tending to build the more beautiful world that we all know in our hearts is possible?
Beautiful question. I think it's an essential question. Um, I give a talk at the end of next month. Two talks. One is at Lewis and Clark at the annual Animal Law Conference, and it's on interdisciplinary matters. Why does animal law need to be talking to the other disciplines that look at non-human animals? Um, the Lewis and Clark people are spectacular, by far the leaders. And there are other good schools too, but Lewis and Clark, this is a new question to them.
Hmm.
And I'm the last on the last panel on the last day, and I realized I don't care. I just want to be able to say uh, that something. I'm asking the question you're asking. How can we do this better? Um, I think the answer is talking to each other carefully, assiduously over time. The following week, I go to Yale. First of all, I'm with the law people telling them you got to do more than law. That's somewhat arrogant. Although I have a JD, I can be arrogant. So um, now then I go to Yale and I'm at one of Mary Evelyn's conferences, and I'm going to talk to religious people about the fact that they have to talk to other disciplines about other living beings. Um, so again, I'm gratified to say I don't know, other than what you and I do with each other. Um, I think is really important. What people do by looking at podcasts is important. And then we begin to build on that. I think people who can work in their local education system and get some kind of connection to the other than human world, whether it's ecological or whether it's individuals of other species, those, there is, as both of us know from our personal experience, there's so much dynamism in that. That if you can light the fuse in young people, they will stand on our shoulders and see further. That's really, I think, what our generation, I'm the two generations ahead of you, one generation at least. But it is the helping others open their eyes, open their ears, share with each other in that good faith way. It is that self-transcendence, and all of us end up so much more by doing it. It's at first, it seems counterintuitive. How can I be more by self-transcending myself? It's like, well, just try it. Just try it for a decade and watch what happens. And it's those kinds of things that I think are actually sit at the heart of religious traditions that makes them such vital parts of our lives. You pick whichever one you want, but pay attention to it and watch how humility is a core value for individuals in it, and community of a larger sort is a core value too. Put those two together, Sam, I think we're on our way to starting an answer that's better than I don't know. It is, we will learn those skills. We're very bright animals. Animal protection is nothing if not an affirmation that humans are bright animals, bright enough to see that there are other intelligent animals. That has slipped away from us in the last millennia. But our indigenous ancestors knew it, and our job is to bring back their wisdom into the foreground and then let our heirs take that where they can.
Very beautifully said. And yeah, I agree. That is a little better than the just I don't know answer, which I feel like you've really exemplified throughout our entire discussion today, which is that a deep sense of humility, and one that you say we've lost largely, at least in modern Western society, and it's something that our indigenous brothers and sisters have kept alive and well. That sense of humility, that we're one animal among others. We're a bright animal who should have the sense to know we're an animal among other animals in a very big Earth community that's bigger than we can manage. I think that's a wonderful way to put it, and something I really appreciate. It reminds me also, Catherine Hayhoe, the climate scientist, will sometimes say the best thing you can do about the climate crisis is talk about it. And if we can just talk to one another with a sense of humility, then we can build the bridges we need to make our way into the future.
In 2023, a book came out in Yale, the Rediscovery of America. That's an amazing thing. The Rediscovery of America, written by an indigenous person, Ned Blackhawk. That I read that book. It's a long book. I read slowly. I read that book again, took notes on it a third time, was just thinking, in a way, we need a rediscovery of humans,
Mm.
of recognizing that when we're at our humblest, we're actually at our most powerful for seeing things that we weren't taught. I follow the culture that I'm in. I speak English and several other languages, but I was raised in a consumer culture and um, have some of the vices that go with that. I know that, and I realize, okay, I'm trying to unlearn some of those, but it's hard to unlearn basic cultural messages. I realized that the unlearning part is as every bit as vital as the learning. And I don't want to
Mm.
be flip about that, but I mean by that the humility side of it so that we can actually give prospects of wisdom to those who follow because we set out and recognize we don't have all the answers. We'll try to equip you as well as we can for you getting further along this path than we are right now.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great note to end on. But I gotta say, we have to do this again sometime soon. Uh,
I, I I do know about this. And I'll gladly do that. I'm when I'm walking with you, it's I'm walking with someone who's got the kind of wisdom that helps me realize keep walking. This is good.
Mm,
This is the sort of thing that all of us need to go forward. And we're in a polarized environment right now in the United States,
yeah.
and talking well with each other is something that is so badly needed. So you and I can make our contribution to that by doing this a second time.
Hey, you got it. Yeah. Second time, and yeah, maybe a third time.
Sure.
'Cause yeah, this was just a delight, and I have yeah, just could do this for the rest of the day. Uh, but but generally try to keep it around an hour. There's podcasts out there who have like 3 hour episodes, but we try to keep it a little more reasonable. But yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again. This was such a treat. Thank you so much, Paul.
Sam, it's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to walk with the kindred spirit. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was just a delight. And thank you. And thanks to everybody tuning in. We'll be back with some more conversations for you soon. In the meantime, take care and be well.